much better. Thank you. Hello everyone, James Donaldson here with Contemporary Gentleman, and I'm bringing you a video on gun silencers. Now there's a lot of information to put out, so this video will be one of 3. Now that being said, my gentleman's disclosure, what are we talking about in this video? Well, real quick I'm going to talk about what a silencer is and how it works, and then of course we'll go into why you would use one, and then we'll touch on the caveats and variables. Now real quick, you get anywhere from 1 to 4 noises out of a gun. If you're getting all 4, it's the sound of the bullet leaving the barrel with all that pressure leaving at once. That's what a silencer is there to reduce or nearly eliminate. And then you're going to have the bullet breaking the sound barrier, which is another noise. Granted, you can get bullets that don't do that, so that's a way to reduce or eliminate that noise. And then you're going to have the sound of your action. And of course, depending on how quickly your action cycles, you'll get varying amounts of gas being pushed back through here and escaping out there, which of course is going to make noise in turn. Most of these noises you can eliminate. You can get a weapon that isn't semi-automatic, so that reduces the action and that extra noise of it leaving through the action. You can get subsonic bullets, and then you can get a silencer. Granted, it's called a suppressor because you never totally silence sound of that pressure coming out. And of course, if you're in the real crowd, you call them cans. But anyway, suppressor is really the term that people use because it's more accurate. However, silencer is on the law and the patent. Now, how does it work? Well, you got your can on the end. Inside is a series of baffles. You got your hole down the center for the bullet to travel, and gas is slowly depressurized as the bullet exits, and then you have a lot less pressure coming out of here with the bullet than if it was just coming out of the muzzle. And of course this is slowly cooling, which in turn is also reducing pressure. It's a little bit of sound elimination, but not as much as a muffler. Muffler, that's a very big part of how a muffler works, not just how it's letting off pressure. A lot of people think they're the same thing, they're really not. Why am I mentioning the muzzle? Or excuse me, the muffler? And that's because these mufflers were invented by the same person, Hiram Maxim. Fun fact, check it out, learn more. So, getting into it. Why are these such a hot ticket item? Well, I can assure you that it's not because they're super quiet, which we will get into. But first, people will say, we've gone this long, they're not that popular, why do we still care? Why do we care now? Why are we trying to get them deregulated now? Well, in 2010, the amount of silencers owned in the United States were right at 285,087. So, 7 years later, in 2017, that number increased 377% to 1,360,000 and 23 cans owned. So, why? Well, let's talk hunting and self-defense and soldiering for a minute. Big thing is flash hiding. Why does that matter in hunting? I will say real quick. When you're hunting things like hog or coyote, you actually do kind of want to hide where you are. Obviously it doesn't matter so much of the deer. I'm talking about those animals. I'm talking about something like a hog where you're trying to kill as many as you can because they're ruining the environment. Not just your land, but the environment. Research it. Anyway, especially at night, or really at night, any weapon is going to have flash as the gas exits all at once. So a weapon like this has a flash hider, which is also poorly named because it does not hide the flash. It does reduce it. Now, if you put a silencer on, it's going to greatly, much more than the flash hider, it's going to hide that flash. Some silencers are going to do it better than others. It just depends on the design and the purpose of the silencer. Some are very much aimed at damn near eliminating that flash, so they're going to do that better. Now, moving on, you're going to have your night vision for you soldiers or police officers or even civilians that like to shoot with night vision, something I recommend. In fact, many people use night vision to hunt hogs and coyotes. So, that's going to flare up in your night vision. It's going to affect your tubes, and Of course, it's also going to affect your vision briefly. It's not detrimental, but it is something to consider. Now, having said that, moving right along, you're going to have your secondary signature. So leaves moving, branches if you're in the woods, if you're shooting prone, dust, or other things getting kicked up. Now, that won't just give away your location, but it's also going to make it harder for you to see what's happening downrange past your muzzle. So, quieting all that drama is a really great thing to do, and it's really well done by a silencer. So, moving next, we're looking at accuracy in long-range shooting, seeing your bullet wash. So whether you're hunting at a distance, or you're a sniper, or you're just shooting for fun at distance, being able to see what's happening all the way down there, not just generally what's in front of you, such as your bullet wash, which is a little mirage behind the bullet, helps you see where your shot went. If you're going to make adjustments off that, it's going to be hard to do if you can't see that. So this happens by, like I said, all the drama at the muzzle. So if you quiet all that down, especially dust getting kicked up, you're going to be able to see what's going on. And then you can adjust accordingly. Now, recoil reduction. So how does this affect accuracy in long range? Well, adding weight to any weapon is going to reduce recoil, especially if you put it in a place like the front of the gun. It's going to reduce the gun wanting to move up, and because it's weight, it's going to help the gun not want to move back so violently. Another part of that is, of course, you've got the slow, steady bleed off of pressure exiting all at once, so that's also going to reduce the recoil. This allows the shooter, especially if it's someone who doesn't get to shoot that weapon often, therefore they're not as used to it, or you have a new shooter that's not used to shooting at all, this is going to, again, cut down on the drama. They can focus on what they're doing, the fundamentals, their trigger pull, they can focus on the target, etc., etc., etc. That way they're not going to flinch or worry so much about how the gun's going to move. So, moving on from there, the actual accuracy, increasing the accuracy and stabilizing the bullet. You've got the bullet's under pressure longer by extending this distance from the barrel. So a lot of people think silencers actually reduce velocity. They actually help increase it a little bit. So that's what you're looking at. Now, as far as stability, instead of the bullet going from all the pressure to none of the pressure, it is gradually going to no pressure. So this helps the bullet stabilize. Believe it or not, physics is not my first love, but it's something I'm kind of coming to terms with as I study things like this. So, let's talk about what silencers are really purchased for. That's sound reduction. Now, I talked about bullets still hitting the sound barrier and making a crack. That's going to happen. And so, I mean, I'll say over 90% of calibers, maybe give or take, but I would say over 90% of calibers are still going to do that. Especially when you have calibers that you can get supersonic or subsonic ammunition, as it's called, 9mm, you can get it in both. But some calibers, they're just going to be supersonic, especially rifle calibers, most of them. So you're always going to have that noise depending on caliber choice. And then of course there's the OSHA 140 decibel mark. So silencers aren't what we call Hollywood quiet, where, well, I'm not going to imitate the noise, but you can you've seen movies. So OSHA is all about getting it under 140 decibels. That's what it's all about. At 140 is the, I guess, determined by science, magical number, where if a noise is 140 decibels or greater, you're going to experience permanent hearing damage. If it's below 140 decibels, then you won't. There's a caveat to that that we'll discuss shortly. So, okay, James, well, why the big deal? Exactly, why the big deal? Why are we so worried about them being regulated when they don't do what they're thought to do, which is why they're regulated? In fact, I still recommend you wear hearing protection. James, why would you recommend that? We'll get to it. So, let's go ahead and talk soldiering and self-defense. So, you don't want to kill your ears in confined spaces. So when you think about a gun like this, that has a silencer that's tiny enough that this can fit in a pretty average gun safe and then be pulled for self-defense. So if I'm to defend my home with this gun, this is helping me ensure that I, myself especially, because I'm at the gun, but also my family who's in the house, that no one is suffering permanent hearing damage just because we're trying to defend our home. So when you think about my wife and daughter, off in the house, safe, they're not going to suffer damage, especially no more than me, who's again at the gun. So let's also talk soldiering, police. Go to an indoor range, then go to an outdoor range if you're not familiar with gunfire. The confined space of indoors greatly changes the impact of a muzzle blast. It makes it, of course, a lot louder. You can feel the pressure, not that that's a huge thing, but thing is that's really rough. So even with a suppressor on, it's extremely loud, probably not hearing safe. It's to where, in practice, I recommend hearing protection. So take the suppressor off, especially a weapon like this with a shorter barrel that's good for indoor work. Of course it's going to be louder because it's a shorter barrel. So add a can on the end and you're going to be helping yourself out. Now let's go to hearing your environment, kind of talk about soldiering and hunting. So when I was overseas and we were doing work on the ground at night with night vision on, luckily night vision allowed us to use some hand signals, but there's a lot that goes on the ground and a lot of communication. You can't just do that all the time. You need to be able to communicate verbally. So what that means is if you're walking around with hearing protection on because you're worried about getting in a firefight, you're going to have to raise your voice and shout to somebody when you're trying to not give away your position. So you're not going to wear hearing protection. But now you're in a situation where, okay, if we get in a firefight, there's going to be a lot of loud noise. It'd be good to at least soften that. Again, we'll get into more details on 140 decibels, but anytime you can reduce a lot, an impact, a negative impact like permanent hearing damage, wouldn't you want to do it? So, next, let's go into hunting. Hunting, kind of like soldiering, it's as much about not shooting things as shooting things. So anytime you can be more aware of your environment, it's going to help you not shoot things you shouldn't shoot and focus then on shooting something that you should be. There's so many things going on that anytime you can know more about your environment, whether you're at a grocery store or you're hunting or you're soldiering or you're picking your kids up at school or doing any number of things in any walk of life, awareness is a very big part of successfully continuing your day to the next day, believe it or not. So, suppressors, being a key part allowing you to do that in certain scenarios, are really great. So, when you think about it, hearing, you can hear everything around you. You can only see so much. So hunting with hearing protection in all the time is kind of unsafe, is what I'll say. So don't wear hearing protection. Throw it in when you see the animal. Well, if you've ever been hunting, you know that's oftentimes, probably more than 50% of the time, not a realistic option. Now, can you just endure the blast like your grandfather did and put up with it? Yes, but your grandfather probably has hearing aids, and part of that is possibly due to repeated hunting. So, if you can just put a simple little cylinder on the end of your weapon, by the way, they do make them for shotguns. Here's one for shotguns, it's called the bread box. Anyway, if you can throw a simple device on the end of your gun to mean that you don't have to wear hearing protection, so you can be more aware, but you're not damaging your hearing when you go to take your shot, whether you're hunting or do whatever it is you're doing, defending your home, out defending our country, then doesn't it seem like a no-brainer? Am I crazy? Anyway, so I think you get my point now. So we'll go ahead and move into caveats and variables. So Europe, for instance, pretty strict gun laws. Granted, it varies country to country, but pretty strict compared to the United States. They really don't restrict suppressors at all. You can damn near buy them over the counter. Now, in America, you get to fill out a 4473. If you don't know what that is, check out my video on the internet loophole and the gun show loophole and how they're myths. But anyway, I talk a lot about the 4473. It's what you fill out for a gun, and if your state doesn't really ruin your 2A rights, then they let you take the gun home right after that, after the background check is conducted. Then great. I don't know how other countries work, if they have that same system and that's how you do the suppressors, or if a suppressor is like a bipod and you just buy it over the counter. Either way, a lot of us that want to legalize suppressors, we would be totally fine with being able to at least just do 4473 versus the current standard, which is a year-long wait time, give or take a few months, which we'll get into in just a moment. Now, they're shooting the cans wet. Wet means you're putting in what a lot of people call ablative material, which is a fancy term for foreign material. Now, this only works on handguns, not rifles, because the pressure is too high. And even then, some handgun calibers, pressure is too high. And also, when I mean foreign, I'm not talking about dirt, I'm talking about a material that will cool with and evaporate with the hot gases coming from the gun. So, I'm talking water, naval jelly, wire pulling gel, things like that. If you put them into a can, they're going to quiet the rapport even more. Now this is limited for a number of shots. A can like this Aurora 2, that's where most of its suppression comes from. So this can is very restricted on how many rounds you can put through it before the gun is no longer hearing safe. Then you send this back to Gemtech as the manufacturer, and for a pretty fair price they repack it and then send it back to you. Now then there's a can like this Osprey, and what you can do is pour water in it, or any of those other materials I mentioned, or a can like this you can take apart, you can put it right in, and it's going to suppress the gunshot a lot, and then it'll eventually run out, the can will get a little louder, but the can uses other methods of sound reduction, so you can continue using the can as is. So that is what is called shooting the can wet. Now, 140 decibel mark. That kind of goes away with repeated gunfire. So if you're getting in a gunfight in a house, if your gun is 135 decibels, you could still get hearing damage. So that's again where I recommend practicing as much as you can with hearing protection on. Well, James, if we're putting hearing protection on, what's the point of the can? Well, the can is for when basically after your dress rehearsal. So if you're firing live rounds inside a house to practice for invading Bin Laden's house, then hearing protection with your suppressor on your gun. Then when you get to Bin Laden's house, hearing protection, don't wear it. Your can's going to help kind of split the difference, or even do better than that. Now, for hunting, sight in your rifle, especially if you're at a public gun range where people aren't using their suppressors, because suppressors do change the point of impact, depending on the suppressor, different amounts, especially the further out you go. So, wear your hearing protection, and then when you're taking that one shot at that award-winning, prize-winning buck, don't wear your hearing protection, because you want to be aware of your environment and you're just taking the one shot. So there are things like that to consider. Now let's get into the cons. So wait time, as I already mentioned. And the ATF actually, because of, as the demonstrated ownership has gone up, the ATF recommended that suppressors be taken off the NFA, which is the law that has these regulated, because it was taking up, or is taking up, too much of their time, too much of their resources, too much of our tax dollars, which is how the ATF is funded, and so they were suggesting they be removed. Of course, this stopped after the Vegas shooting, where I don't think suppressors were even used, but the ATF kind of stopped being on our side with that. That having been said, another big con to cans is it's very hard to try out multiple cans. You can't just go to a gun range like you can guns and try them all out. Luckily, a lot of gun ranges have cans now. You're pretty much always going to see an Osprey, but if you're wanting to try one out, like a GM45 from Gemtech, they're probably not going to have it. So there's probably 25 to 50 cans, probably more than 50 pistol cans on the market. I would guarantee there's over 100 different rifle cans on the market today. So trying them out versus just watching YouTube videos on end and reading articles, which is pretty much how I do my research, because other than the select sample size right here, that's how I got to get my knowledge. So unfortunately, because not just everyone has one of these, it's a lot harder to experience new things. And of course, cans have gas. Oh yeah, cans have gas. Now, to explain it, what you saw there was all the gas coming out of the gas block, because this area was closed up here, and of course the suppressor on there, and it was aimed down. Now, what is happening here is the gas is following the bullet down the barrel. The gas block, which is under here, and then you've got, till when the bullet exits out of here, the gas is diverted up the gas tube to make all this work. That's how this weapon functions. So, that being said, a lot of gas coming back this way, especially this type of weapon is a Mark 18, which sends extra gas back. Now limit that with the suppressor on the end, and it's a lot of gas back in your face. So some things people have done is they can get bolt carriers that divert more gas out, charging handles that divert gas, but I mean it's still pretty bad with that. I've heard the bolt carriers are way better. You can also get a piston system installed, or install it yourself, where there's a metal rod and all the gas kind of stays up here, pushes the rod, which pushes all of that. That being said, you can also buy a weapon, AR platform or not, that already has a piston from the beginning, from the factory. So, with all that said, well, there's remnants for a rifle, or you can kind of muscle through it. With a rifle, pistols get real finicky, mainly because they get so dirty. Suppressors make your weapon, rifle, or pistol very dirty. Granted, to varying amounts, depending on your setup, but still. This pistol, Glock 17, pretty much the Toyota Corolla of the gun world, and it became extremely unreliable with this can. Now, it was really ammo choice. If I picked the right ammo, then it worked just fine. If I didn't, there were a lot of malfunctions. So, you're taking a pistol renowned for reliability, and you're basically saying, forget all that. Granted, some cans are better than others, point being that you're greatly complicating an already kind of complicated platform. So, definitely a con to cans on your pistols. That's why a lot of times you'll see people who have a pistol non-suppressed and a rifle suppressed. Granted, also remember the rifle is going to be louder, so if you're going to suppress one, suppress the one that also doesn't go in a holster, because it's very hard to find holsters for a suppressed pistol. I actually have a video on that and what I've found with my research. So, all that having been said, weight. A lot of pros to the weight of a suppressor being added, but a lot of cons. Again, going back to pistol, a lot of pistols function by the barrel, if you can see it, tipping up as it rides back. So adding weight makes it ride back slower or not as much. The barrel wanting to tip as it pops around this corner right here, the ejection port. If you're fouling that up, that is also a big part of ruining your pistol's reliability. Now granted, there's also just adding weight. Maybe you're hiking miles, don't want to add the weight of a suppressor. Granted, some suppressors weigh very little, like this GM45. More on that in another video. So anyway, weight can play a con as much as a pro. Cost. MSRP is $1,200. This can, MSRP $1,000. $995,000. Now add the $200 tax stamp to pay the government to regulate an item that's already expensive, and you're in a lot. Now, kind of aside to that, this is a 5.56 dedicated can. Granted, you can shoot some smaller rounds or equal size rounds like 22, but very limited in what calibers you can use. This is a 30 caliber can, so any caliber 30 or below, you can shoot through it. So there's actually definitely over 100 rounds you could use this can for. So you don't necessarily have to buy one for a rifle, especially with the fact that you can quick attach that to different rifles or thread it. So you kind of work around the cost to a degree. Now, even with the cons, why haven't you bought one yet? So the close. Bring it on home. Several of the cans can be fixed, as we've discussed. Now with that, the wait time is a doozy. So what can we do? Well, regardless of the regulations on them, we can still keep buying them. Especially if you don't have one, buy one that you can use on mini calibers, things of that nature, because you're going to increase exposure. Creating people's exposure who aren't familiar with these items, making them familiar with them, is going to make people realize that they really just are expensive, slightly complicated hearing protection versus the tools for clandestine murder that Hollywood makes them out to be. You're not going to have a shootout in a subway like in John Wick and have nobody notice. Maybe you could do that scene with a 22 long rifle, but even then, stretch. So, as I'm saying, Maybe one day we can get them off the NFA, which would be really great. And what are we going to see from that? Well, the costs are probably going to lower, so that problem's going to kind of help itself. And then you're also going to see improvements in design. The AR market took off as people began owning ARs more and more when that assault weapons ban, that infringement on the Second Amendment, when it ended, the rate at which ARs have improved, or the customizations, or the new innovations have been crazy. And even with what increased suppressor ownership we've seen, I have seen a lot of innovation in my research in the last 10 years. This wasn't a concept 20 years ago for sure, but this setup has some really great features to it that probably wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for all the research that goes into it, which that research is paid for by product selling. So I'm excited to see where the market could go if these were unrestricted, or restricted a lot less. Now, another thing you can do is join the American Suppressor Association. They don't know who I am. I'm plugging them on my own, but I am a member of them. So even though I give them money, they still probably don't know who I am. They have legalized silencers completely in 3 states, and they've gotten them legalized for hunting in 18 states. Pretty impressive. So, to sum it all up, I would say cans are well worth the effort and even the cost. There are things we can do about the wait time, but in the end, waiting is waiting, whether it's an hour or a year. If you don't get something now, you'll either never get it or you'll just wait for it in the future. So that's what I have to say about that. And if you liked the video, I'm sorry it ran a little long, but if you liked the video, you can always help us out by subscribing to our channel, liking the video, and of course helping us out on Patreon. That'll first go to more products and production value before anything else. So, thank you for your time, and until next time, keep your composure.